Welcome to Beyond the Bit Quantum Pathways, the podcast where we explore the exciting world of quantum careers. I'm Amir Rasool, your host, here to bring you inspiring stories from industry pioneers, researchers and innovators who are shaping the future. Whether you're a career changer, a curious mind, or an aspiring quantum professional, this is your gateway to discovering opportunities in this groundbreaking field. Welcome to our podcast on quantum computing. Today, we're thrilled to have with us Christopher Bishop, a true Renaissance man with a fascinating career journey. Chris is a TEDx speaker, a workplace futurist, and a host of the Qubit Confidential podcast. With over 3 years of experience hosting the Quantum Tech podcast, Chris has interviewed over 75 senior executives at leading quantum companies. Chris's unique background spans from touring as a rock musician in the 70s to spending 15 years at IBM. He's been deeply involved in the quantum computing world, serving as master of ceremonies for various quantum events in Silicon Valley, Montreal, Paris, Washington, D.C., New York, London, and Singapore. As the program manager for QED, Chris has been instrumental in connecting students in quantum information science with mentors from the private sector and national labs. His passion for helping people reinvent themselves and prepare for the future of work makes him an ideal guest to discuss the exciting developments in quantum computing and its impact on careers and technology. With a wealth of experience and engaging personality, we're in for an enlightening conversation about the quantum landscape and its future implications. So without further ado, let's welcome Christopher Bishop to our show. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining me. Been great to see you again and looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks for inviting me to join you. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. So as per my introduction, you're a man of many talents. And obviously you're very much into quantum, educating it from a career perspective. So I think talking to you will be very interesting for our listeners, as this podcast is all about educating people in this new technology, how to navigate, so on and so forth. So all of your input will be great. So touching on that, I suppose the first thing I wanted to talk about is your career. You've had a pretty fascinating career. You've been a rock musician, you worked at IBM, and now you're a quantum computing expert. I suppose you've pretty much had a non-linear career. How can people aspire to do something similar?
Well, I would say I sort of had this revelation a few years ago that I was, with all lack of modesty, somewhat the poster child for the way today's learners are going to work in the 21st century's global borderless workplace. So I began to try to sort of codify how I'd gone through this non-linear multimodal career path. I mean, I've had 8 careers so far, with a degree in German literature from a small liberal arts college in Vermont.
Wow.
I mean, 6 months after graduating, I got a gig touring with this country rock band. We're opening for the Eagles and ZZ Top and Fleetwood Mac. And
amazing.
But the meta message is there's lots of opportunities today for learners and students and even people mid-career to shift gears and do something maybe that's more interesting than what they're doing now. And keeping in mind that the model is, multiple careers rather than just doing one thing. I mean, so I worked at IBM for 15 years.
Sure, yeah.
With some people who'd been there 30 years, 35 years, one guy 40 years, doddering around the office space. It's like those days are gone pretty much,
Long
right?
gone. Yeah.
I mean, no more, gold watch and the parachute out the window. Yeah. And the freewheeling pensions they used to give out were just amazing. God bless. But that, again, it's a new model. So, although I was saying, helping learners get excited about that they're going to do cool things over the course of their work life.
So I suppose what drew you to quantum?
Well, to be honest, I've always been kind of a closet geek, if you will. Mm-hmm. I mean, I worked in the jingle business in New York, composing music for TV commercials on a synclavier, which was the state-of-the-art digital musical instrument at the time. Where you could sample any instrument and store the timbre on a Winchester drive, 512K, whoa, and then summon it to a keyboard and play all the parts. One person could be the string section and the drummer and the bass player and the keyboard player and whatever. So I've always been sort of into that. And I think one of the triggers was that I contend that in 1985 in New York City, I lived in Manhattan for 16 years, music became data. So it was a transitional point. Tipping point, much like ChatGPT on some level. Yeah. As a musician, you had to learn how to deal with samplers and sequencers and computers, or do something else. So, by the same token, people having to learn how to use AI today and ChatGPT and all these other tools to stay current. And these are trends that have been going on for literally hundreds, if not thousands of years. So
yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's interesting you say that. I was talking to somebody yesterday just about the 12 KB. My first computer was an Acorn Electron, which was 32K.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. But yeah, I suppose that kind of leads on to.
I wanted to continue. So you asked how I got interested in quantum.
Sure.
Just a quick sidebar. I got offered, and this is sort of an unlikely, serendipitous event, and I would encourage listeners, viewers, whatever, to keep in mind this is often how it happens, how next careers or next areas of interest get introduced into your life. I got offered a press pass to a quantum event in Boston. I live in Connecticut outside New York. So I went to this event. A friend said, hey, I got a pass to this quantum thing. You want to go check it out? And I'm like, yeah, it sounds interesting. Never really heard of it. Yeah. And I went up and I went to this 2-day conference where people like Worley, CEO of Strangeworks, was speaking. Christopher Savoy, who's the CEO of Zapata. They're both bass players, by the way. Okay. And I was just captivated. So I befriended the organizers and just sort of worked my way into their network. And they invited me to possibly be a moderator. And so the rest, as they say, is history. I mean, I've now been involved in quantum for about 5 years. I published 76 episodes of the Quantum Tech Pod for Inside Quantum Technology, one of the seminal event production and news organizations in quantum. So that's kind of how it happened. I just became intrigued and I've pursued it.
Yes, similar to me, I suppose. Obviously, I'm a recruiter, and I've been kind of following tech throughout my career, and I followed AI, and I was looking at data science, machine learning, and as a result, I started hearing about quantum, and quite similar to you, I got, but not as long as you, I got invited to the Economist conference a couple of years ago in London, and I was like, okay, this is something that's interesting, and I got bitten because you know, I mean, for all the conversations, you know, it's coming, it's there, and it's going to be revolutionary, and I was like, okay, very interesting place to be.
Yeah.
So I suppose on that, I mean, I know you've developed Future Career Toolkit, which is obviously says what it does on the tin. What are the sort of key strategies on that could be particularly relevant for people looking to enter quantum computing?
So it's, again, back to my trying to codify how I navigated these 8 careers.
Yeah.
One of the processes was to come up with something tangible that could help today's learners or any, potential career movers, if you will, make decisions about, how to navigate the new workplace models. So I put together what I call my Future Career Toolkit. Yeah. Has 3 tools: voice, antenna, and mesh. Yeah. Voice is a ideation exercise. I worked with a sort of an ideation guru here in Connecticut, a friend of mine, and it uses triggers like picking your favorite book, TV show, game, movie, and using that to drive out, what you're interested in, what your proclivities are. Yeah. I was content to sort of like, what would your mom say about you? Oh, well, that Bobby is really good at whatever, Yeah. So a more formal process for teasing out those kind of criteria. The second tool is antenna, which is an activity where I ask participants in these workshops that I run to look for places where these conversations are going on. Could be an elite newspaper, could be TikTok, could be the Wall Street Journal, could be somebody dancing on YouTube or whatever. Sure. But to find where the content's being created around these topics that you've teased out in the voice exercise. And then the third tool is mesh, which is sort of creating a 3D data visualization exercise. Yeah. So looking for where are the actual companies and people and organizations that are leading the thinking in these areas that you've identified. Yeah. Connect with them on LinkedIn, go meet them at events if you can, if they're speaking or participating in live activities, and sort of build out your network so that they know who you are and they know that you have interest and talent and skills and expertise in areas that they're focused on. And that's sort of how you can navigate, multiple careers. That's my model.
That's super interesting. So how could we get a hold of this?
Well, so I do workshops and lectures at universities. Actually, I'm going to be in London in March. I'm going to do a lecture at Institute of Physics and one at Royal Holloway. I'm going to go up to Oxford and do something for the Oxford Innovation community. Mm-hmm. But I also have a book coming out in May. It's called Improvising Careers, Succeed at Jobs That Don't Exist Yet. So I'll be sort of publicizing it on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. My general admonition is, please, viewers, watchers, listeners, feel free to reach for me on LinkedIn. And I'll be putting up some notifications about when it's available, when you can pre-order it. But if you're around in London at any of those universities, they're public events. So again, send me a note on LinkedIn. Come and hear me do my lecture workshop.
So well, what I'll do is after we've recorded and posted, I'll make sure there's links to everything so people can kind of click on that and follow through, and obviously a link to yourself as well.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So the book's Improvising Careers. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I did do some research, and I know you've got a workshop which I was looking at, and it's how to succeed at jobs that don't exist yet. I suppose what advice would be applicable to quantum computing careers?
So I think it's always good to take a step back when thinking about quantum computing careers, right? Mm-hmm. I think many people have the misconception that you have to be a particle physicist or have a PhD in condensed matter physics to work in quantum. And that is certainly not the case. I mean, those people are needed for sure, men and women with those skills. It's laudable that they have done that work and that research. But the idea to keep in mind is that these are businesses at the end of the day.
Yes.
When we talk about how quantum is emerging and being evolved and applied, they're business models. Yeah. I mean, IBM is not doing it for fun.
100%.
They're doing it because they think there's a pony in here, meaning they think there's a margin, they think there's attributable revenue. I mean, certainly, to benefit mankind and do amazing things like accelerating drug discovery and financial portfolio optimization. But the idea is there are lots of adjacent and ancillary skills that are needed to make these companies go. So I say this to your watchers and listeners, and certainly this, Amir, but while scientists may be at the core of the business, if you will, there are executives that have to run it. In a C-suite that has to deal with the P&L. There are salespeople in business development who have to be able to go to a client and say, this is going to drive your business model, this is going to deliver value and put you ahead of your competitors. You need UX design, human-computer interface people. Exactly. Like, how do you touch this stuff? How do you deal with? How do you turn it on? How do you turn it off? How do you put in instructions or whatever? You need people interested in education. You need people who are focused on policy and regulatory conversations. How are we going to regulate this? If we regulate nuclear energy, AI is a little bit of a free fall moment, if you will. Yeah. But this is going to get scrutiny at some point. Quantum is going to need to be focused on in terms of, how it gets used. Yeah. There's what I call the picks and shovels aspect. So test benches, optics, lasers. I mean, people who, I liken it to Levi Strauss made money from the 49ers in the California Gold Rush by selling picks and shovels and tents.
Exactly.
They did very well. That company is still in business.
Yeah.
and
it's a good point, isn't it? People kind of think, and it's probably because of the technology. You think, I've got to be technical specialist, but it's actually how do you build out a company? How do you build out a competitive advantage? How do you build out a market? And everything that goes in that, from computer hardware, software, marketing, sales, accounts, etc. And that all plays a part of being, as far as I see it, in the quantum industry. Yeah,
for sure. And even, so other skills, I have a long list. I have this sort of chart that I put together, this evolving quantum workforce ecosystem. But anyway, other skills like PR, marketing, you're seeing quantum companies poaching chief marketing officers from big general advertising agencies. You're people who've worked in, say, consumer tech, but are fascinated by quantum and move over to a quantum company and begin articulating, the value of this technology. So all the major banks are investigating quantum. I mean, Goldman Sachs had a quantum research area that Will Zhang, who's now at Quantum Nation, ran for many years. All the major consulting companies, McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture, have desks and focus areas because clients are saying, what is this? Where do we put this in our 5-year plan? So although I'm saying there's lots of opportunity for viewers and listeners interested in quantum to get involved.
Yeah. And interestingly, obviously, it's now being spoken about at higher, different levels. I understand that you recently spoke with Steve Suarez, and I believe he's at Davos in the up and coming weeks as well, isn't he?
Yes, he is, and he's a great story. So he sort of instigated the quantum conversation at HSBC when he was global head of innovation, and they're doing a lot of really interesting work. Again, an international bank that realizes quantum has applicability not only from a revenue perspective and investment perspective, but also they're using QRNG solutions, right? quantum random number generation to improve authentication and validate signatures, if you will. Working with a company, a little plug for Quantum Dice, Sanette Sarieva.
Yeah.
She's the CEO of that company, and they're working closely with HSBC, other banks, investigating. Also, I think worth mentioning the fact that post-quantum cryptography has moved the conversation about quantum from a quasi-esoteric backroom R&D IT department conversation to a board-level conversation. Because Q-Day is coming, right? The day when cryptographically relevant quantum computers can crack current RSA and ECC encryption protocols. The thread is called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later. So certainly anybody with proprietary information from Coca-Cola to Pfizer, certainly military secrets are going to be a target. So that's big business today. That's happening in quantum now. And again, those are business models that need lots of adjacent and ancillary skill sets to drive them forward.
Which kind of, so exactly, there's things that you forget about that bolt on to the idea of quantum. And this is why I love your industry insights. You mentioned earlier that you'd interviewed 76 senior executives in quantum. I suppose, just kind of leading on from that, what trends have you observed in terms of skills and backgrounds that people are looking for new hires? You obviously mentioned cryptography. Is there a pattern emerging?
Well, I think from a market perspective, I've seen it sort of shake out into certain categories. So quantum computing is sort of the darling of the press, right? It gets all the media, it gets the spotlight. I mean, ever since Google in 2019, I guess, declared they'd achieved quantum supremacy, people have been, oh my goodness, this is going to be transformative. And it certainly will. But I think near term, as I mentioned, post-quantum cryptography and QKD, another solution, right? Quantum key distribution, are getting much more focused now. Because situations like governments are issuing mandates to their departments saying, you've got to come up with a plan to do a cryptographic audit and tell us how you're going to protect your data. Like, where's the valuable data? How are you going to protect it? So that's driving real business models today. The secondary area where I think we're getting near-term traction is around sensing, quantum clocks and sensors. So I did a podcast with Michael Bierkuck. He's the CEO of Q Control in Australia. And this is a couple of years ago now, but they had won a contract from the Australian government to build out space-based quantum sensors for the Moon to Mars supply chain. So think about that for a second.
I know. It's just mind-blowing, isn't it?
The what?
Exactly.
Right? But that's happening. We're seeing quantum sensors being applied in biomedical and geophysical settings as well. Company Circa Magnetics in Nottingham, England, has a 3D printable wearable quantum sensor to detect childhood epilepsy, 50 times more sensitivity than current, MRI kinds of solutions.
I actually saw their presentation at the NQCC conference in London, and my partner's a consultant neurosurgeon, so she's like, you've got to pay attention to this. And it was fascinating. Some things I didn't quite understand, but nevertheless, it just shows that what can be done. So your podcast, I was saying that you referred to, is that the Qubit Confidential? Yeah.
Well, so I was working with a company called Insight Quantum Technology, terrific company based in New York, and they were sponsoring the Quantum Tech podcast, which I did for them for 3 years. Yes. And then I've moved to Alpha Events, to the Quantum Tech organization, and they're producing something called Qubit Confidential. And I've done, I think, 4 episodes so far. And they've been great. They've been very supportive. And again, the key is my motivation has always been with these podcast kind of sessions is to track down C-suite execs that are connected to the business. Right? Ideally someone with a P&L, right? Profit and loss responsibility, running the business. And I've spoken to a few scientists, and I don't mean to disparage scientists or people doing other roles at quantum companies, but I think it's fascinating to speak to these men and women who either have started or joined companies that are looking to certainly generate business value and more broadly, advance human endeavors, if you will.
Sure.
So that's kind of my target for guests.
What's the most surprising insight that you've gotten so far? That's kind of popped into my head from we were talking about the mission to Mars type thing.
Yeah. So in terms of applicability, like where they're going to be used, yeah.
Or just ideas, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, so another area around quantum clocks and sensors is this idea that using quantum for navigation. So in what they call GPS denied environments, certainly like submarines, right? Yeah. So a submarine 6 feet below the surface of the water, you're gone. I mean, you have to use other tools to navigate, right? And deep in mines or the sub-basements of buildings or other settings where GPS satellites, can't reach, won't penetrate. Mm-hmm. So they're using grammetry and magnetometry to conjure new ways to navigate. And the contention is that every sort of square foot of Earth's surface has a gravity fingerprint, just like humans, right?
Yeah.
And that you can capture and monitor and manage and codify that data, if you will, and use that data to navigate new ways to get around, move ships and planes and submarines and vehicles on the surface and whatever.
Wow.
So that's pretty interesting. That's pretty exciting.
It's pretty interesting. I'm going to have to look into that.
Yeah.
It's all Star Trek, isn't it, really? It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
I suppose on that note, I know you work internationally, as part of the introduction, you've worked, you've done keynote speeches, you've master of ceremonies, and so on. Have you seen a difference in the computing landscape internationally, and how could that provide opportunities for people within quantum?
Yeah, no, good question. I think, again, back to the idea that these are businesses, the thing to keep in mind is it's a landscape, right? Again, quantum writ large is a landscape. So it's like, you can't say, so what's new in quantum?
Sure.
It's like saying, what's new in biology? I mean, it's a constellation, if you will. So that represents opportunity. There's certainly the major players. They're big companies, international companies, IBM and Google and Microsoft and Amazon. But there are literally dozens of startups focused on sort of niche kinds of solutions, software, hardware to some degree. There are companies that sell just dill fridges. There are companies that are working on solutions that are tied to vertical specific problems. So again, lots of opportunities. I would encourage viewers and listeners to explore. Don't just think if you can't get hired by IBM, there's no way to get involved in quantum. Cool. Look for an area where you have interest or skills or experience, and do a Google search, do a LinkedIn search, track down a company, connect with somebody at that company, based on what your interest is. And it's wide ranging, right? There's lots of ways to get involved. So that's what's exciting. This whole landscape, big companies and tiny startups, and and they're still appearing. I mean, I hear about new companies all the time coming to market with yet another way to put together a circuit or another way to design wiring harnesses or whatever it might be.
Answering questions or problems that we haven't even thought of yet is crazy. What's going on at universities, academia, and so on that we don't know of. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And lots of ways to stay on top of all that too.
Yeah.
Again, just a sidebar is, there are some great sources of information. The quantum computing report that Doug Fink puts out with Global Quantum Intelligence, Andre Koenig's organization. Quantum Insider has great information. Yeah. There are lots of resources out there, just, to Quantum Zeitgeist, Quantum Dragon.
Yeah.
So I encourage viewers and listeners to, put together a list of sources and just stay in touch.
Yeah. So what you've touched on, what I've started to see is previously you had a lot of sort of quantum startups or the big companies like the IBMs, the Googles, etc., who are looking at quantum. But now I've started to see the shift. We mentioned HSBC, you've got SAP, you've got VW, you've got Airbus. All companies now looking at it from a different perspective and are starting to build out their own quantum workforce. And the reason why I, as a recruiter, focused on this, because I realized, well, there's going to be a demand. There's, that's going to increase. So how do we help facilitate these companies to grow? And part of this podcast is to educate people along those lines as well.
Yeah. Be ready to maybe work, start a skunk works at your company, at your organization. Yeah. There's a great story of a woman at Rihanna. She works at Investec. She was a speaker at the Economist Commercializing Quantum event and telling us about how she got involved in quantum. And the bank was looking to stand up a quantum practice area, right? And so they looked through resumes of employees, and her name popped up because she has like a degree in astrophysics. Yeah. So they're like, hey, let's get Rhiannon in here. She could probably help us put this together. And she did. She now has like a team, a staff, and a budget, and she's driving their quantum skunk works at the bank. It's fascinating.
Amazing.
So,
I suppose so as we're kind of looking at the students, this question I suppose I'm going to ask and see how you feel about it. Are there any areas of study that you would recommend people focus on right now for looking at future opportunities?
Well, again, because there's a range of ways to get involved, a whole coterie of like skill sets that are needed. Certainly, if you're into science, I would encourage you to study quantum physics, quantum mechanics, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, software, become a computer scientist, because it's all about code, much of it at the end of the day. But I would also encourage viewers or listeners who are interested to think about other ways to get involved in quantum. I mean, I'm a big fan of humanities. And here I am, a guy with a degree in German lit, right? Yeah. So I think even if you're taking, condensed matter physics as your major, take like a course in medieval Irish literature, right? Or explore other topics that you may not be familiar with. Because it'll teach you how to think outside the box and how to think more broadly when you're confronted with problems or challenges, rather than just be sort of narrowly focused on specific sort of discipline, math or science or physics related education. You'll have a bigger picture perspective on how problems get solved, how businesses grow, how history evolves. So that would be my 2 cents.
Interesting. Very interesting. I suppose there are very many ways to be involved in quantum. Similar to you in terms of a fan of humanity. When I recruited in AI, my sort of hashtags were data for good and AI for good. And that's kind of right. I want to focus on companies and sectors that are doing things that are going to promote humanity, are going to promote civilization and so on. I think one of the interesting things about quantum is it's going to open up so much. So you don't necessarily have to come from that limited background. And because it's going to be answering questions that we don't even know exist yet, of a diverse background can be quite interesting.
Yeah. And again, I say, with the exception of maybe students who've been at university in the past 2 years, you couldn't graduate from college and get a gig at a quantum company. There were no jobs. Those jobs didn't exist like 5 years ago, right? Many didn't exist 3 years ago. So this is you, listeners who are maybe millennials or Gen Z, you're the first generation to be able to study this topic and get a job at a company and make a living, be remunerated at a reasonable level. This was all pretty much academic and in university research labs and R&D. And, some companies, IBM's been involved in it a long time. Other companies have been. Microsoft, actually, I did an interview with the GM of Quantum at Microsoft. He said they've been doing it for 17 years to varying degrees. So, but that's the exception, right? Not the rule, which means it's exciting. So my general guidance, again, my career counseling, my workshop 2 cents is chase the maelstrom, find the chaos, go for the mayhem. What that translates to is go where they don't know what it is yet. They, the royal they being existing business models. And quantum certainly falls into that category. So go explore, find, ways to contribute, invent and create and do something really interesting. Brilliant. That's what I would encourage viewers to do.
Brilliant. Popped into my head. You've mentioned your past previously, but you haven't listed it. So you've had 8 careers to date. What have they been?
What have they been? Well, so touring rock musician, studio musician in New York, very different skill set. In the jingle business, writing music for radio and TV commercials. Wow. As a freelance web producer, I worked at a couple of seminal interactive agencies in New York. I was then hired by IBM into corporate internet programs, and I worked there in several different roles, certainly initially as a web producer for lines of business. My clients were like corporate communications and global services. I did exec comms at IBM. I supported a couple of execs with big P&Ls that had a B. I mean, big numbers. It's IBM after all. But even a $3 billion P&L at IBM is kind of a rounding error because it's a $60-odd billion company.
Yeah.
But those are big numbers, right?
Yeah.
And then working as a freelance consultant and writer, I give lectures and workshops at universities. And I'm now an author. Again, the book is coming out in May. And I still do gigs. I still play in a couple of different bands here in Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, I saw you last year as well. At Twickenham.
Well, and we have a band called Ion Maiden,
Yeah.
which is these quantum execs who are great musicians.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we did a gig in DC last April. We did one in London in September. We're going to play again in DC this coming April for the Quantum Tech event.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Amazing. I think that's all we've got time for today. I know you're a busy man. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to reading Improvising Careers. And as I said, I'll put links to all of this in comments. And hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you again in person next time I'm in London. And again, I encourage your viewers or listeners to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Will do.
And check out the podcast, Qubit Confidential. It's available on Spotify and on Apple Music. I think you'll find
one thing we forgot, you're also doing audiobooks as well, aren't you? Haven't you done an audiobook for Alice and Bob?
I did, So Alice and Bob, the Paris-based quantum computing company, put out a really brilliant white paper that's available as a PDF, and they asked me to read it, to do sort of an audiobook version of it. So I did. It's about 52 pages. That's also available on Apple Music and Spotify. Really interesting sort of story about, how the company came to be and their take on what they call cat qubits as a way to mitigate error correction and their roadmap. They lay out a very specific roadmap of here's the plan. Yeah. Here's what we're going to do. This is the timing. These are the milestones. So I encourage
an impressive thing to do in an area that's quite vague, for want of a better way of putting it. Flag in the sand.
No, I always find it laudable when quantum companies, IBM is sort of the main progenitor. They've put out a roadmap for several years and stuck to it, be able to make the milestones. Many quantum companies, because it's such a nascent technology, they're hesitant to commit. But to Alice and Bob's credit, they put out guidelines and a roadmap and have plans to stick to it. So it's exciting.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you very much. And I look forward to meeting you in person again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
And that's a wrap on today's quantum adventure. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe, share it with a fellow quantum enthusiast, and leave us a review. It helps us reach much more curious minds. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out at beyondthebit.quantum@gmail.com. Stay tuned for more exciting explorations into the world of quantum careers. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, keep exploring the quantum possibilities.